Imagine the worst pain you've ever felt. Now imagine there is no pharmacy, no painkillers, no hospital, no anesthesia, no doctor, no pills of any kind. Imagine you break your leg while hunting, miles from home. Imagine a tooth begins to rot inside your jaw and there is no dentist on earth. Imagine giving birth, or being wounded in a fight, or slowly dying of an infection, with absolutely nothing modern to dull the agony. This was reality for nearly every human being who has ever lived. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors faced pain, injury, and illness with none of the tools we take for granted today. And yet they endured it, treated it, and sometimes even cured it. This is the story of how humans dealt with pain before medicine existed, and some of the things they figured out are far more sophisticated and far more disturbing than you might expect. Let's begin with a simple truth. Pain has always been part of being alive, and for most of human history, it was a much larger part than it is now. There were no safety nets. A minor cut could become a fatal infection. A broken bone could mean a lifetime of disability or death. Toothaches, childbirth, wounds, burns, and disease were constant companions. So the question our ancestors faced wasn't really, can we eliminate pain? It was, how do we live with it, manage it, and survive it? And over tens of thousands of years, through trial and error, observation, and desperate experimentation, they developed a surprisingly deep toolkit. The first and most important tool was the natural world itself, the plants around them. Because long before there were chemists synthesizing drugs in laboratories, the planet was already full of powerful medicines, growing wild, waiting to be discovered. And our ancestors, over countless generations, discovered an astonishing number of them. Consider the willow tree. For thousands of years, across many different cultures, people chewed the bark of the willow to relieve pain and reduce fever. They had no idea why it worked. They just knew that it did. Thousands of years later, scientists would isolate the active compound in willow bark and use it to create one of the most widely used drugs in the world, aspirin. That's right. One of the foundational painkillers of modern medicine is, essentially, a refined version of something ancient humans were already using. They discovered it not through chemistry, but through patient observation and the willingness to try. Then there is the opium poppy, one of the most powerful and dangerous plants humans have ever encountered. Cultivated as far back as the Neolithic period, the poppy produces a substance that is one of the most effective painkillers known to nature. Ancient civilizations across the Mediterranean and the Near East used it to dull agony, induce sleep, and ease suffering. It was a genuine miracle for people facing unbearable pain, and, as we've explored before, also a devastating trap for those who came to depend on it. But in a world with almost nothing else to offer relief, the poppy was priceless. Across the world, similar discoveries were made. In the high Andes, the coca leaf was chewed to numb pain and fight exhaustion. Various cultures used cannabis for its pain-relieving and calming effects. Certain plants were used to numb the mouth for dental pain. Others were brewed into teas to ease the agony of childbirth or calm an upset stomach. Every region developed its own herbal pharmacy, a body of knowledge built up over generations and guarded carefully by those who knew it. And this points to something important. In most ancient societies, there were specialists, healers, people, often shamans or wise elders, who carried an enormous store of knowledge about which plants did what, in what doses, and for what conditions. This knowledge was not casual. It was refined, tested, and passed down with great care, because getting it wrong could kill someone. Many of these traditional remedies were useless or based on magical thinking, but a surprising number of them genuinely worked, and some are still used in refined form in medicine today. Now let's talk about the harder stuff, because pain relief from plants only goes so far. What did ancient humans do when the problem wasn't just pain, but a serious injury, an infection, or something that had to be physically fixed? Here, things get remarkable and a little bit horrifying. Let's start with wounds. Our ancestors understood, at least in a practical sense, that wounds needed to be cleaned and closed. They used a variety of natural materials to treat injuries. One of the most fascinating is honey. Honey has genuine antibacterial properties, and cultures around the world independently discovered that applying it to wounds helped prevent infection and speed healing. They didn't know about bacteria. They just knew honey worked. Certain plants, molds, and clays were also used on wounds, some of which had real antiseptic effects. In a world crawling with infection, these treatments could mean the difference between life and death. To close wounds, humans developed early forms of stitching, using needles of bone and thread of sinew or plant fiber. Some cultures even used a truly ingenious method involving certain species of large ants. They would hold the wound closed, let the ant bite across it so its jaws clamp the edges together, and then break off the body, leaving the head in place as a natural suture. It's the kind of solution that sounds insane until you realize it actually works. Then there's the setting of broken bones. Ancient humans understood that a broken limb needed to be held straight and immobilized to heal properly. Archaeological evidence shows healed fractures, bones that had broken and then mended in reasonably good alignment, which tells us that someone knew to set the bone and splint it. This is medicine, real, practical medicine, performed with nothing but knowledge, patience, and simple materials. And now we come to the most astonishing and most unsettling part of the story: ancient surgery. Because our ancestors didn't just treat surface wounds and broken bones. In some cases, they cut into the human body itself. The most famous example is a procedure called trepanation, and it is genuinely one of the most shocking things in the archaeological record. Trepanation involves drilling or scraping a hole directly through the skull of a living person, and it was not rare. Skulls with these deliberate holes have been found all over the world, on every inhabited continent, some of them thousands upon thousands of years old. Why on earth would anyone do this? We're not entirely sure. It may have been to relieve pressure from head injuries. It may have been to treat headaches, seizures, or mental illness. It may have had spiritual meaning, a way of releasing evil spirits believed to cause disease. But here is the truly staggering part. Many of these skulls show clear signs of healing around the hole. That means the person survived. They didn't just endure someone cutting a hole in their skull with a sharp stone. They lived, sometimes for years afterward. Think about what that implies. A prehistoric surgeon, with no anesthesia, no antibiotics, no understanding of germs, performed brain surgery, and the patient survived. That is not the work of primitive savages. That is an extraordinary, terrifying level of skill and knowledge, and trepanation is far from the only example. Consider dentistry of all things. Archaeologists have found human teeth, 9,000 years old, with neat holes drilled into them, evidence that someone was using a stone-tipped drill to remove decay from a living person's tooth. There are ancient teeth filled with beeswax, and even early attempts at dental work using materials to replace what had rotted away. In ancient India, a surgeon named Sushruta described, thousands of years ago, an astonishing range of operations, including reconstructing noses using flaps of skin, a technique so sound that its basic principles are still referenced today. Across the ancient world, healers performed amputations, drained abscesses, removed arrowheads, and treated horrific battlefield wounds. To stop deadly bleeding, they used cauterization, pressing something burning hot against a wound to seal it shut, a treatment that was agonizing beyond description but could genuinely save a life. Every one of these procedures was carried out on a fully conscious, or barely sedated, human being. The courage required, on both sides of that operation, is almost impossible to imagine. The person wielding the tool needed nerves of steel and years of hard-won knowledge, and the person on the receiving end needed to endure something that would send most modern people into shock. This was medicine at the absolute edge of human endurance, performed with stone, bone, fire, and an almost unbelievable tolerance for pain. Of course, surviving these procedures, and surviving pain in general, raises the obvious question. Without anesthesia, how did anyone endure this? The answer is a combination of things, and none of them are pleasant. Some cultures use the pain-dulling plants we've already discussed, opium, alcohol, and various herbs, to take the edge off. Fermented drinks were a common way to numb both physical and emotional pain, but often there simply wasn't enough relief to go around. And so a huge part of how ancient humans dealt with pain was, frankly, endurance. They lived in a world where pain was constant and unavoidable, and they developed an extraordinary tolerance for it out of sheer necessity. This is hard for modern people to fully grasp. We live in a world where we can eliminate most pain with a pill. Our ancestors lived in a world where pain was simply part of the texture of existence, something to be borne, managed, and pushed through. Their relationship with suffering was fundamentally different from ours, shaped by a lifetime of exposure to hardships we can barely imagine. Nowhere is this harsh reality clearer than in childbirth. For nearly all of human history, giving birth was one of the most dangerous and painful things a human being could go through, and there was almost nothing to make it easier. There was no anesthesia, no surgery to fall back on if something went wrong, no way to safely intervene when a birth became complicated. A difficult labor could, and often did, kill both mother and child. And yet women face this again and again because the survival of the species depended on it. What they had, instead of medicine, was each other. In culture after culture, childbirth was surrounded by experienced women, midwives and mothers and grandmothers who had accumulated generations of practical knowledge about how to help. They knew positions that eased the process. They knew herbs that could help. They knew how to comfort, to guide, and to act quickly when things went wrong. This body of knowledge, passed from woman to woman over countless generations, saved untold numbers of lives. It was one of the oldest and most important forms of medicine that ever existed, and for most of history, it lived entirely in the minds and hands of women, never written down, simply carried forward, birth after birth, generation after generation. The pain was unavoidable, but the knowledge, the support, and the fierce practiced care of the women who gathered around each birth were a kind of medicine all their own. There was also a psychological and spiritual dimension to all of this, which we shouldn't overlook. In many cultures, healing was not purely physical. It was deeply tied to ritual, belief, and community. The shaman who treated an illness didn't just apply herbs. They performed ceremonies, chanted, and invoked the spirit world. And here's the fascinating thing. This may have genuinely helped. We now understand the power of the placebo effect, the way belief and expectation can measurably reduce pain and influence healing. A patient who deeply trusted their healer, who believed in the ritual, who felt supported by their entire community, may have experienced real relief. The mind is a powerful tool in the management of pain, and ancient healers, without understanding the science, were expert practitioners of it. The care of the community mattered too, in a very direct way. Simply being looked after when you were sick or injured, being fed, kept warm, and protected while you healed, dramatically improved your chances of survival. And the archaeological record shows evidence of exactly this kind of care. There are ancient skeletons of individuals who suffered severe injuries or debilitating conditions, people who could not have survived on their own, and yet lived for many years afterward. That means someone cared for them, someone fed them, protected them, and helped them through. Compassion, it turns out, is one of the oldest medicines of all. So let's step back and look at the whole picture. How did ancient humans deal with pain before medicine? They did it with a deep and hard-won knowledge of the natural world, a pharmacy of plants discovered through countless generations of trial and error. They did it with practical skill, setting bones, cleaning wounds, stitching injuries, and even performing surgery. They did it with ritual and belief, harnessing the mind's own power to ease suffering. They did it with the care and compassion of the community, looking after the sick and wounded until they healed. And when all of that fell short, as it often did, they did it with sheer, staggering endurance, bearing a level of pain that most of us today will thankfully never know. It's easy to look back at the ancient world and see only ignorance and suffering. But that misses something essential. Our ancestors were not helpless in the face of pain. They were resourceful, observant, and astonishingly resilient. Much of what they discovered laid the foundation for the medicine we have today. That willow bark became aspirin. Those herbal remedies became pharmacology. That practical wound care became surgery. Modern medicine didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew, slowly, out of tens of thousands of years of human beings refusing to simply accept their suffering and searching, always searching, for a way to make it stop. So the next time you swallow a painkiller for a headache and the pain fades away in 20 minutes, Take a moment to appreciate just how extraordinary that is. For almost the entire history of our species, that relief was a distant dream. Every easy remedy you have today was purchased with the pain, the experimentation, and the endurance of the countless ancestors who came before you, and who faced their agony with nothing but their wits, their plants, their community, and a courage that is genuinely hard to comprehend.